Hey everyone, John and Matt here. Hope everyone is doing great. Welcome back to the Story Prism podcast. So glad you guys could join us. For those who don't know, we're the creators of Story Prism, which are AI writing tools that simulate collaboration with a co-writer. If you're interested in checking that out, we got a link in the show notes. But today we have a really exciting guest, Ross Allaire. He's a man of many hats based out of New Jersey, a top notch screenwriter who was a semi-finalist for the Page Awards. He's also a singer songwriter, volunteer stand up comedian, inner city Eagle Scout, former EMT, and of course, a loving husband. Allegedly, because we can't really confirm that last part. But if you're a member of Screenwriting, which is the biggest Facebook group for screenwriters with over 80,000 members and rising, then Ross needs no introduction because we all know him as the man, aka the administrator of this group. So Ross, thank you so much for coming on today. We're really excited to meet you face to face because we've been frequenting the screenwriting group for quite a while. So seeing the person behind the group is just really surreal for us.
Absolutely. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on. It's great to kind of come out from behind the keyboard or from behind the screen a little bit to be the face of the screenwriting group, which I basically am anyway, but actually with my real face instead of a cartoon picture. But as I said before, I'm basically a walking, talking cartoon character anyway. So it's actually a really good fit.
Yeah, that's funny.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries, man. So I mean, I guess we could just really kind of dive into this real quick. But let's just start with the basics. Like what's your day in, day out like running such a big online group?
Yeah. The group is like a large, unwieldy kind of tree, I guess. It needs it's like a bonsai tree or something. But the first few years, I've been adminning for 7 years in the group, and we had 56,000 members when I first started, and now it's up to 83 and a half, or maybe 84 at this point, thousand members. And I like to think those first few years were basically trying to get like the wiring around the different branches of that tree and trying to get like how much water does it need. Oh, that was too much water. There's a lot of like really big work early on that at this point the group, it doesn't run itself, but a lot of the legwork was done really early on. That way it could be this kind of positive, fun environment to discuss screenwriting, discuss, the nuts and bolts of stuff. Um, you know, Getting great mods was absolutely part of it. We have an excellent mod team. I love every single one of them. But yeah, like getting, it seemed like when I first came on, like there was no one at the wheel. The group was just kind of there. So some of it was like figuring out where the wheel is and how to use it, because it requires a lot of finesse, just steering that ship.
And by like steering the ship, do you mean more in technical terms, or do you mean like kind of like group psychology terms? Like, hey, what's gonna piss off like everybody, or what's gonna, get them to stay on,
It's both, absolutely. What I mean in technical terms is like adjusting the group rules, just to give myself and the mods like kind of leeway in terms of how we moderate stuff. And setting, like the group has settings for the admin assist program, which is a form of AI in which you can screen out certain keywords, certain key phrases. I've set it to not allow people to post emails because that was a huge spam issue. I tried to set it at one point that it would screen out any post that had a phone number in it, because that was a big like WhatsApp, spam issue. And we were just getting hundreds of bot posts at a time with these WhatsApp numbers and like a video. So it would kind of pass through whatever filter Facebook usually had for that. So trying to get that right, like the WhatsApp thing has kind of subsided. So we actually relaxed that rule. But early on, that was one of the big things, like how to stop the spam, is paramount. And that was one of the two big things: no email addresses. It even gets tripped up a little bit if you tag other members in posts, because it somehow interprets that as an outside link, even though it's an inside Facebook link. But yeah, the phone numbers thing, like if you, it would get to the point where if you typed out like the word for, it would think that was a phone number. It would go like, that's a number, and blam the post. It's like, well, that person was talking about this movie. That was a legit screenwriting post. Right. It said this film won 4 Oscars in 1997, and it's like, the AI just went, that's a bunch of numbers in a row, get it out of here.
Oh, wow.
So that was one of the things we kind of learned. And that was something, I don't know, like I was willing to take on it. But at one point, during COVID, I had nothing but time. So it was like, all right, that's the rule just for spam purposes. If, to members themselves, hey, if you find your post, is unfairly being screened out because of this, please reach out. I'll take care of it. We had to fight with the AI a couple of times. Of like, no, it kept wanting to screen it out. And it's like, no, I've liked it. I've commented on it. Now, for some reason, that tripped it into like, okay, we have to re-examine this post, or maybe a person then was coming in to look at it. I wasn't quite sure. So that was one of those rules that was like, it was okay. And then just became too much, because the AI started to kind of go overkill on it. So we're like, all right, relax the rule. Just trust people to report spam,
Oh, so that's interesting.
Because it was screening out, like it started to screen out like one or two posts from big members, from regular members that have the biggest posts in the group, like Bob or Jim Kalergis or Bill Martell or Helen Black. Like they have posts that do major numbers, in terms of other members, so like having one of their posts be that thing that we have to fight with, was just not working out. It's like, no, I want those to just go through. They're the big ones, they're the big members.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that would kind of be ruinous, because then they would leave, they'd get frustrated very easily.
Right,
so
right.
yeah,
Right.
that's interesting. It's like, you can use AI to like help you with those things, but then at the same time, because it doesn't have reason, right?
Yeah.
Because it can't see the nuances with these posts, then it's obviously going to do a lot of, false flags and whatnot, and that's going to upset a lot of people. So I guess, like, how did you even land this gig anyway? And is it like your full-time job? You get paid for it, or is it just volunteer?
Completely volunteer, 100%. All the mods are volunteers. The old admin and I also kind of looked into this at one point. Like, is it even legal to, try to make money off of this somehow? And it is technically. The group is a group. It's not a page. There's nothing we're advertising. We try to go out of our way. At least I think it's in the group rules somewhere, that like we don't really show preference for a particular program. As admins and mods or whatever, we don't really show a preference for one thing or the other. Like the idea is just to create an environment where people can debate final draft versus one of the other ones. I swear by final draft. So one of the other things, I don't Highland,
Oh yeah,
Right.
Celtex too.
Celtex,
I think
right.
I started with Celtex because it was just such an easy interface. Final Draft had so many buttons, and I was just overwhelmed when I was starting. I didn't know what any of them meant. But then Amazon came out with one. Do you remember that one? They had their own they had their own writing
really
app.
nice.
It was nice, except for the fact that your stories were essentially now in their database, and supposedly like some people wrote some really great screenplays that ended up somehow making it into like Prime or something like that. Like,
Right.
the writer,
they at one time they had a system where basically they were actually looking for, they were looking for amateur writers and story ideas, and they were actually actively trying to get you to submit stuff. So
yeah,
I think there was a thing where they tied, their screenplay app to that, kind of maybe inadvertently.
Yeah, exactly. Like they were
or on purpose or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to start anything, but there is some controversy there, which is interesting.
Yeah, but the
but it's I mean, my perspective is similar to like something like Scrivener or whatever, where your whole novel is just in the cloud on this website. I'm too old school, I guess, or just too old, but it was just like, I don't trust it. I don't trust that. I need it on a disc in my hand. I need to print it out. Now I'm not so much that. I'll take a PDF, as wrote. It exists. It's fine, but also just the cloud is a little more trustworthy, now. So I don't blame people for wanting to do that. It's certainly better than having, folder after folder in some, or a file after file in some folder that you can't even find, on your computer. It certainly it makes it easier. And anything that allows the person to get straight from the idea to the writing stage, like you said, I call it Celtics. What is it? Celtex?
Celtics.
I think it's
Celtics.
Yeah,
like the band or like the team, right?
Right.
I don't know. I've only ever read it, so I have no idea how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
But I'm good for just my catchphrase is final draft and forget about it, or forget about it. Because I've, like I'm a little old school that way. I was using Final Draft 2, my very first screenwriting program, and it was incredible. And yeah, the ribbon wasn't as involved. You really could just like open it up and just start writing. And I still don't have a big working knowledge of like the background stuff in Final Draft that people do for just the development process or the getting their own thoughts together on it. I'm very simple. I write in Microsoft Word and make a bunch of lists of things that are going to happen in the script. And then I just start writing it in Final Draft, or I start writing a treatment in Final Draft first. Just to get those ideas from an outline into like, well, here's the kind of a little version of the story, but the whole thing scene by scene by scene, as opposed to just kind of ideas. And that's some of the background stuff with Final Draft. And I guess in a sense, what AI will start to maybe do to help people get the idea into a workable screenplay format, just to go like, well, I want this to this, but I don't know how to write scenes that get us from here to there.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is a big controversy now, especially the WGA. I know they're one of the things that they're in talks with is how AI is going to impact the industry and what's going to constitute the copyright implications of that, and how credit's going to be assigned. And I think they did a ruling where they basically said that they're going to treat it like a brainstorming tool or something like assistant, but they're trying, they see the future of potential executives basically vomiting out a draft with some AI and then hiring a writer to kind of spruce it up. And I think they're trying to prevent that, because that obviously is a negative outcome, because then writers will not have the less work of it. They'll be able to pay them less and this and that. So I don't know. It's just very interesting. But I'm very, very glad that they're thinking about that, because we're not there yet, but it's coming. The future is on the horizon.
No, yeah. To your point, I might not have even thought about that until now. Just I was coming at it from sort of a perspective of like, well, how different is that really from like a writer's room or a development room where it's 6 people throwing out different ideas and kind of getting those into well, here's the 20 story beats that it needs to have. What's the difference between that? And I've seen a couple of instances of AI, write me a save the cat style beat sheet for this log line, and it can do it. And you have to finesse it as a person or whatever. But, to your point, yeah, like development with humans is important. Having that room of writers where ideas can be challenged, by real life experience, is absolutely 100% essential. Even just for a solitary writer, to have criticism before their ideas ever even get to paper is really important. Well, those story beats, yeah, you can do save the cat style thing. Every movie can just be a save the cat style thing, but people will ultimately decide whether or not that was good enough. That was a good, structure to tell this story in, which is not always true. The structure changes according to the emotionality of the story, which the person theoretically is much better at identifying, even flaws in it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to the reason thing. So it's like you can have it do all these things for you or whatever. Like say executive producer like has this idea of like, well, what if in the world, like, all the adults turn into kids and all the kids turn into adults and blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, it can make something, whatever.
Yeah, you could absolutely feed that into an AI chatbot.
You just need that person.
And tell me the story beats necessary for this story. And boy, I don't know what you're going to get out of that, but it's going to be cookie cutter. How much did you feed into the AI to begin with? How many different movies does it know to really like compare that to, other than big blockbusters, which are generally the hero's journey, or art house films, which are generally tragedies. That there's a lot in between those two things that a person is much better at kind of modulating that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is one of the big fears, that a lot of people have, is that we're entering a world where it's just, where content, movies, stories are going to be kind of homogenous and everything's going to be kind of the same. You're already kind of seeing that a little bit, obviously, with Hollywood, but that's more financially based, but it's more like if everyone can use these AI tools to create stuff, right? Are they all just going to be the same? Is everyone just going to be making the same kind of story, the same kind of thing, same kind of images? And, that's really where the human input, like you said, is going to be super important. That's where the true creativity comes from, is that human side.
No, and like you said, I'm glad the Writers Guild is already kind of onto that. Okay, this is going to be an issue, or in all likelihood, it's already become an issue.
Mm-hmm.
If they're looking into it, it means there was a movie that was made, or at least pitched.
Yeah,
that was almost solely AI, or like, well, I had this concept. It's somebody known. Like if they're already talking about it, it means it already happened.
Yeah. Oh, I guarantee you. I mean, I've already heard like stories of people submitting screenplays that were entirely AI generated. They just went into ChatGPT and did it, thinking that they could, totally pull it off, and then.
Yeah, I'd be curious. A couple of my ideas that I don't really like have the time or the inclination to write. I'd be curious to see what an AI would just pump out.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, it's like, well, we'll send it to a We Screenplay or one of these review services and see what they think. Also, like, if it's a hit, it's a hit. But at the same time, that is horrifying. Like the implications of it.
Yeah,
that it's that easy. Like, no, you should really take your time and craft that. There's a reason I'm not writing this as a person. That should have some kind of bearing on.
Oh yeah,
it getting written.
Yeah.
Well, this wasn't a really good enough idea to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah. It was just really interesting. There was an article I read. It was a news article. It was basically like this. It was a novel, sci-fi novel competition, or sci-fi short story competition.
Mm.
And the judge, was able to identify that these were made with AI. It's like there's a difference. These were just vomited out, not even looked at and just submitted. You know what I mean? But it was interesting because he was able to tell the difference there, and I actually think that that's a good thing, because it's like, okay, good, he was able to basically tell the difference between something that was human generated and something that was created by.
It would be like kind of using like Wikipedia quotes or something in a research paper. Like if the professor is good, they're going to catch that and go like, this is straight from Wikipedia. I know this from Wikipedia.
Yeah. But I think honestly, this has kind of opened up the floodgates, though. So I totally believe, looking more into it every day, like I actually think this is going to reshape the way we create story, not just the way, but like what a story is. So like if you notice, like the meme phenomenon that came out, right? It was like a picture of some weirdo in the 80s or whatever. Somebody discovers it in their grandpa's closet, uploads it, puts it out there with no text. Suddenly everybody's remixing it, and you're just viewing it in so many different ways. And the reason why is because it's so easy to do, right? You don't even have to really know Photoshop to make a meme, and I feel like, if it just becomes easier and easier and easier to do over time, we'll kind of, yes, you'll have like the traditional style movies and stuff like that. But within that mix, you're just going to have these like radical, like weird remix, like movies that just mash so many things up and allow you to explore it too in different ways, like different dimensions, rather than just like through a linear path,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I kind of just feel like that's where it's going. And so then that kind of begs the question, like, how do people get paid then in that kind of world, right?
Or is it a case where it's like, okay, the big fear is that AI is going to take a lot of creative jobs. And I certainly think that that's, probably very likely for certain jobs. But I think that, to Matt's point, it's like, well, perhaps a future exists where AI generated media is just like, it's just its own thing. And then it's like, okay, well, that's like a new entertainment thing. It's fine. And then, but there's still demand and for human created stuff. And so there's like two different worlds, it's like, with video games, there's a thing that came out in the 80s, 70s, 80s. Now video games, $1 billion industry. So AI generated media content, I don't think it's going to replace movies or replace screenwriters or replace these things. you're still going to need all that, but it's just going to be a new medium, a new entertainment vehicle. So
No, I agree. For better or worse, my feelings on it don't matter. But at the same time, I'm much more worried about AI's applications in other industries, I guess. It's kind of my take on it. As a person, as the admin, I don't really weigh in on this stuff. I just ban the posts that get out of control, on this topic, because it is like there are two camps. There's, this is going to help us and be really great, and people are just running straight at it to embrace it and to try to get their hands on this stuff. Like, well, let me see how it might be able to help me. And that's cool. On the other hand, to some extent, like, unless you're like, you're running headlong into the abyss over on this end. On the other end, it's people that are, this is going to take our jobs. This is going to put people out of business. You're going to end up with crap anyway, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the truth is actually will end up being somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
But I'm much more, personally concerned about AI's application in the prison industrial complex,
Sure.
in law enforcement and military applications. I think that's and I'm a person that kind of misses the forest for the trees sometimes, so to my perspective, a lot of the back and forth in the screenwriting group itself on this issue particularly was just not healthy. It wasn't fun. Because people are so kind of dug into what they just already believe about it, either way. But at the same time, that was kind of my perspective. Like, I don't really have a dog in this fight, I might use it to help me at some point, who knows? But it's kind of out of my reach at the moment and not really on my radar of things. I really like the way I do things, which is just stunningly simple to most other people. The group hates it when I talk about my writing process because I just sound like a robot. And I'm like, well, I just make lists of things and then I do this, and it's pretty simple. I think about it a lot and eventually something happens.
So what is your writing? If you could describe it, like, I guess, like, do you do any pre-writing? I kind of like, you mentioned outlining and stuff, but do you do any like thinking about like the characters, backgrounds, and things like that? Like, what's your style there?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I try not to think about too much backstory that's not going to be on the page itself. So that's about as much time as I spend on, like, what's the backstory that's relevant to what's happening now. There's a story about a food truck, and the food truck's haunted. And that sounds super silly, but then I got really serious with the idea of, like, well, who is the ghost? How did they die? All that. And that's the backstory that I was much more concerned about, because it's directly relevant to where the story is and what happens in it. I kind of make fun of other writers that are like, I need to know the character's favorite song or like their favorite color. I just don't care. Like, for my part, I just don't care. But it's a lot of pre-writing. It's outlining, and just I make lists of things. I do a lot of, like, my notes on a particular story are much more like a journal of the process itself. So I end up just writing a lot of, like, well, I want this to be this, or here's what I hate about this. Here's what I don't like about this scene. What can I do to zhuzh it up a little bit, or whatever it is. I just do a lot of kind of thinking right on the page. That way it's a nice clean page when I go into final draft. And, I do a lot of rewriting. I write a lot of scenes that I cut the second the script is done. I just cut that scene because I know it doesn't add anything, but it was necessary to kind of get the voices down of the characters and stuff. That's a lot of, I overwrite chronically, and then people tell me my dialogue is really good because I cut a half of it at least. It's in the, from the first draft. I write that draft knowing that most of that'll go. Most of that is just for me to figure out how they talk. What's going to be their angle on stuff, what's their take on things. So it's just a lot of thinking on the page.
Do you find that you repeat a lot of your information in the dialogue, and then you have to go back and get rid of like 50% of it because it's like, oh, I already said this, but I just phrased it in a different way. You know what I mean?
I apparently have the opposite problem.
Really?
Whatever it is that needs to be said big and loud so the audience gets it, I'm like, no, they'll get, it's there. It's there. They'll put it together. You have to say it 3 times at least. I think it's a Hitchcock thing.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that's really important for the audience, you have to say it 3 times. Because if you say it once, it's like it didn't happen. You know,
Right.
they'll forget.
Well, yeah, it's Nolan's latest movie or whatever that came out. Oh man, what was it called? I'm drawing a blank here.
The one about time travel?
Tenet. Yeah,
Tenet.
Tenet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what. And you know, if you watch that movie, they really do only give the information once, and they do it really fast with a whole bunch of dialogue. I still thought it was a fantastic movie after I saw it like a third time to really understand it.
Hey, you got
like,
3, right? 3.
Yeah, and I was like, whoa, dude, this is profound now.
Yeah.
But like, and it was interesting because I saw an interview with Nolan well before he made that movie, and he said that he was like, you only need to say it once. I don't know why, but you only need to say it once. It's so weird that it's like, you know, I mean, I think it really is just how important is it? And then also how complicated it is, like the moment is, right? If things are moving fast, you may need to repeat that thing like a few times.
And there's a balance. You don't want to be too obvious, you know?
Yeah, that's the problem. Right? I'm always too obvious, and I just end up like, I say it way too many times, and then I'm like, well, now I just got to chop this down and everything. But yeah, no, that's
I accept that I'm weird, and my process is kind of the reverse from most people in a lot of ways. It's not just this.
Everybody,
you know, it's not confined. I wish it was just confined to screenwriting, you know, but it's my whole thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've come, you know, I've just learned that whatever I'm trying to do, that I want to be subtle. From my perspective, it's much more like I just have characters screaming at the top of their lungs, or like, well, here's the kind of the setting of the story makes it really obvious, you know. But I learned that didn't work for me. That's all I can really say is that whatever I'm trying to do that's subtle, I have to make the characters scream it at the top of their lungs, and then the reaction, semifinalist screenplays and stuff, the reaction to those scripts is like, oh, I loved how subtle this was. I'm just kind of like, okay, my mission's accomplished. I made it. I made you have that reaction. You know, it's different the way I perceive things than how they actually are.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like, well, it's similar to what you were saying with the background information. Like, I know, like, I 100% agree with you. Like, a character's their life starts the moment the first slug line starts. You know what I mean? As Aaron Sorkin said, and but I still find myself writing backgrounds not to integrate fully into the story. In fact, a lot of times I don't integrate any backstory at all because it's not necessary.
Yeah.
But I think I do that because I just want to, I guess it's like a personal exercise for me. Like, nobody else is going to see it. It won't be in the movie, you know what I mean? Or whatever, or the screenplay.
They'll change it anyway. It doesn't matter.
They'll change. Yeah, exactly. So it's just like, and honestly, I don't think it's important at all to know things like, what kind of shoes they wear and stuff like that. Like, I always like to focus on how they were brought up in the world. You know what I mean? Yeah. Kind of keep it rough brush strokes. And then that way, it's like, if I do need to go back, like if I do need to integrate that in the script, I can be like, oh yeah, there was that moment with Janie or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. She had a gun, Yeah. So I don't know. It's interesting how people like come to it from different perspectives. And I guess it's probably just, how our brains are wired, I
definitely see there's some writers who just dive in. They don't even plan at all. They have an idea and they just kind of dive and start writing. I think the Coen brothers are describe their process like that, and then a few other writers. And I'm just like, man, like how do you do that without planning at least a little bit of thought about like the structure and how things are going to work? So
everything I've ever tried to write like that was either terrible or I didn't finish it because I had no idea where it was going and all that. So again, I just learned from. I joined the screenwriting group just as a member, like anybody else, because I was struggling with some novels I was writing on the side at the time. I was an EMT forever, an emergency medical technician for 17 years. So like I would come home from a 16-hour shift and just fire up the computer and try to write a few pages if I could, like every single night. Yeah. And the novels were terrible. That was a terrible way to write, just having kind of no idea, but I had the concept and a dream. And, they didn't work out. So like I joined the group just like anybody else. Of like, I need to relearn how to do this, how to tell a story, because I can write, I can put one word in front of the other and it makes sense mostly. But at the same time, I had no idea how to like write a character arc and make that actually land for people, to make the audience actually understand, or the reader to understand like what I was trying to do. Like, well, here's what the heart and soul of the story is. So I had to learn a lot of like just focus on that. That's all the story's about. Everything else is fluff. Everything else is unnecessary. So from my perspective, it was like, all right, I do overkill, so I have to like cut all that out basically, and just focus on, it's about these two people and there's a waterfall, and literally that's the story. And I make it work because there's naturally so much other stuff that I'm kind of doing at the same time, side characters and jokes and whatever it is.
Do you feel like your experience as an EMT, like how has that affected your writing in terms of like understanding? I mean, obviously,
yeah,
not. I mean, you're obviously 17 years. I mean, that's, you've probably seen a lot of things and interacted with other people. Like, how has that affected your writing at all?
I mostly worked I volunteered with the fire department for 7 years. So, I'm very familiar with all that. But yeah, when I was working as an EMT after that, it was mostly with dialysis patients and nursing homes and stuff. So I've heard thousands of stories from older folks about how they met their significant other, how they lost their significant other, all manner of story. And that 100% influences me more than anything else. Just kind of having heard so much of other people's life experiences that, went wrong or were great.
Yeah.
It's probably affected my writing a lot in terms of like, I just kill my characters off at the end a lot of times with my big sad scripts. I know I've gotten a little better at how to modulate, like, all right, here's one that's more lighter in tone and fun, and nobody's going to die at the end. Don't worry. But at the same time, it's just, I'm a lot more real with the characters because I understand people a lot better after the psychology of it all, after just doing that for so long. You see how people really act in crisis situations, and we're taught as writers to raise the stakes constantly. And in EMS, you see a lot that the stakes are sky high. This is the worst day of a person's life, and so you really see how people like honestly, truly react. And some of the shit they say is incredible, and you just want to write it down in the middle of it, but you're too busy. So like that, it helps a lot. It also makes it terrible to watch like some of the blockbuster movies, because you're like, that's not how people react. That's not what a group of people would really do in this situation. They would stand there like dumbasses, and you'd have to go, run, get out of here, go.
Right.
Don't worry don't look back, just go.
That's funny. Yeah. I guess like for me, my experience comes from retail. Which obviously is not anything as crazy as what you've dealt with. But, I used to work at a store that was in kind of a rough area around the Baltimore area. And man, like it was pretty much like Diet Prism. Like, I mean, really it was like, I mean, a lot of the people that I worked with were like, ex-convicts and, people who were probably going to become convicts at some point. And, a lot of the customers were just crazy and out of control. And that's honestly the environment I found myself in while learning how to write. And I think it's done wonders. I mean, that kind of speaks volumes. Like a lot of people, who probably do get into writing or they may not have had those kinds of experiences like you and I might have had, or other people like a National Geographic photographer, and they've worked in offices like their entire lives. But like, even with that, I think you can gain a lot of those experiences vicariously by like really reading a lot of nonfiction. And absolutely. I don't think that's emphasized enough in the screenwriting communities. Everybody says, oh, you always have to be reading screenplays or fictional stories. And that those are all important. But, like you kind of also want to pick up a book on like what life is like in like the Darfur region in 2003, and like, what was it like going through that experience,
Yeah. How do people really, truly react, to these things? Can only make, I've said it before, I've never heard anyone ever complain about a movie's realism, taking them out of the moment or something like, oh, that was so realistic, I just didn't believe it. You've never heard a person say that.
Yeah.
But there's a ton of shit that happens in movies where you're like, that just took me out of it. Took everybody out of the moment because it's just such a stupid thing to show or have happen.
Yeah.
That's not how that works, and everyone knows it. If it's something like that, like that's not how space works. What are you doing?
Right. Exactly.
Or like, no, I think the best one is the drowning, right? Because every time they resuscitate somebody, which I heard is not really that often. But if they do, then it's just like a, yeah, I'm okay, and blah, blah. But it's like, no, man, they're like hospitalized and they got to get their stomach pumped and everything like that. It's like a huge process.
Well, I think in another sense, it's like obviously screenplays are supposed to be movies, and like a movie,
they do
visually. I mean,
you can bend the rules if it's
exactly,
cool, if it's cool enough. You can bend any rule you want. It's fine.
Exactly.
We'll accept it.
Right.
If it's cool enough. If I don't know what it takes, so I just don't do it.
I think it depends on the tone, honestly. Like if you're putting somebody in a world where it's like obviously like some mindless action movie or something like that, then I think you have a lot more leeway to like be a little ridiculous about it. Like, oh yeah, they hide behind like a counter or something, and for some reason, none of the bullets actually penetrate.
Right.
But if you're in like a real serious, like true detective drama, and I feel like you really do need to like emphasize that realism.
Exactly.
And like maybe have the character do get shot when he's behind the counter.
Right. Yeah. If you're making Die Hard, not so much a problem.
They can jump on helicopters.
Yeah. If you're making a serious heavy drama, it's a little bit different. But yeah,
Die Hard, everybody goes like, oh, but he walks through that room on the glass and his feet are all fucked up and everything. And he has like a slight limp for the rest of the movie. That's not,
it's not the same thing. It's like,
being an EMT has absolutely ruined my experience for like, that guy just got shot in the stomach with like a 9mm. He's not flying across the room. And he's also not like instantly dead somehow. Or
right.
That's not how those guns work.
Well, it's also like weird too, because like I notice like if I'm watching like Die Hard like action movie in 2023 and they do stuff like that, I get kind of turned off by it. But if I'm watching something from 1995, for whatever reason, I'm expecting it. And I'm just like, oh yeah, how come they didn't do that? Like
it's like a style.
It's weird. Yeah. It's just like, I guess it's just the world. Like you're presenting me with a world. I'm going to accept it if it's presented in this way that's been presented to me in so many times, like growing up that, but I don't know.
I think movies nowadays are emphasize realism more. And I think that is a thing now. Outside of Marvel movies, right? And all superhero movies and stuff. But I think there is an emphasis, especially with TV dramas on HBO and stuff. It's like, realism is like a big, thing. Audiences are expecting that, I think. But back in the 90s, 80s, action movies and, Stallone and Bruce Willis and stuff like that. Like it was more, I don't know. People were
I love the Indiana Jones movies. Like it's a knockout punch every time.
Right.
Until it's like the big guy at the airport or, they're filling the airplane with gas. Until it's that guy, he knocks every single person out with one punch. And it's like, number one, his hand would be shattered like 3 punches in if he could punch a person that hard.
Right. Or the guy.
Like you like the character, the music's great, the shots are great, the script is great. You have all these other elements. All of a sudden the audience doesn't care and it's cool. That's what makes movies so fucking cool. But at the same time, I've never heard someone complain like the realism of that really, took me out of the moment. Like I hear that a lot on my end with the screenwriting group and just with readers and stuff of like, that's of the utmost importance apparently of like how much it might take them out even just in the screenplay itself. What the phraseology, the phrases you use, can take the person out of the moment because it makes them stop and like have to think for a second, and that's death. Apparently.
Yeah.
I think Dune did a great job. So like one of the things is Dune, obviously Dune's fantasy, right? But there's a lot of information that needed to be conveyed. And a lot of people didn't read the book, right? So I didn't read the book when I saw the movie before. I knew about the book
when I was 12 or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like it's a wonderful story, and the movie was fantastic. And but I think that the filmmakers did a great job of like, introducing people to the world, introducing people to like the environment and how it's working. So like in the first 30 minutes, like you get it, and it's this huge world. I mean, a lot of stuff needed to be explained, and I think that it was really, they did a really good job of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I thought that's an example of something like,
Foundation.
Yeah, right, right.
The Foundation series, like, man.
Oh, that's a good one too. Yeah, yeah.
Saw that first season, man. I was hooked completely. Like, I love Isaac Asimov, of course, but I really love those like old school sci-fis that really get you to think very deeply. They just, I mean, I think they are starting to trend. I mean, I heard from like other areas that like, oh yeah, Warner Brothers has the rights to like Stars My Destination or something, or I can't remember exactly who, but it's some big company. So I think like stories like that are going to start coming out.
I hope so. I grew up on Arthur C. Clarke and Philip K. Dick and Isaac Asimov.
Philip K.
Yeah.
Scanner Darkly, like
absolutely. That's bedrock, stuff that I Arthur C. Clarke especially, I grew up on all his stuff. To the point where like they've been trying to get an adaptation of his book Rendezvous with Rama like for 30 years now, or 25 years at least. And my brother is an enormous fan of that book itself, and it's just been like since we were kids, like it needs to be a movie, it needs to be a movie. So like he's always been on it, and he's an actual philosophy PhD.
Yeah.
And it still has this like, I just would love to see that movie. Like Morgan Freeman was attached, Guillermo del Toro was attached at some point to it. And it just never gets off the ground. It just never goes anywhere. But I'm with my brother at this point. I would just love to see a renaissance and that kind of stuff. Like, well, let's have a real adaptation of this Philip K. Dick story or something that is really close to what he, was talking about, not Total Recall.
Right.
Right,
exactly.
Which is fun, but it's like it's not exactly the book, I know what they're talking about,
Right.
It's
the guy that looks like you or me in the book. It's
right. Right.
It's not Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
Well, it's like,
I
think there's like really kind of just two different types of viewers that obviously they intersect. So you can have somebody who expresses both, but it's really like, do you want to see a movie for meaning or do you want to see it for entertainment?
Right.
You know what I mean? And
I think you can do both. Was saying this to a friend of mine. I'm trying to forge a much weirder path than a lot of other people, I think. And no shit, it's difficult. Where it's like, I think you can do both. You can, I think the best entertainment has meaning. Even if it's just like the Fast and Furious movies, is all about family and stuff like that. Like that's something. It's not a whole lot, and they don't do a whole lot with it. But it's something. It's more than something else might have that fails. People secretly want meaning in their entertainment, just the same. They want to be wowed and have something behind it that they can really identify with.
Yeah, 100%.
But they don't know that they do. They want to see cars. That's what they know they want to see. The thing they don't know necessarily that they want to see is like, well, but then Paul Walker dies and he rides off into the sunset, and it's this great emotional moment about it. They don't know walking in that that's what they want, but then you give it to them and they're like, that was amazing. And now it's iconic and legendary or whatever it is.
I think probably one of the best examples of how they managed both was like Children of Men. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yes, one of my favorites.
Exactly, because it was just like, it was so deeply meaningful, but just at the same time it was just so action packed. It just kept you on the edge of your seat. You never felt safe.
No.
Story.
It was a roller coaster.
And it was just, it was great.
An interesting world, interesting concept. Just everything was fascinating.
But it's hard to do, and it's hard to like predict the outcome of the movies. And that's really what it comes down to. Like the nature of, like, if you're an investor, the last place you want to invest in is movies, like hands down, because it's so risky. And it requires like, I think it's the stats are like, it's basically like 50% of the movies fail, right? And then
it's that low.
Lower than that. It's insane.
That,
There's only like a very, very small percentage that makes a return. And if so, it's like a very small return. Like you're better off just investing in shit coins and cryptocurrency and doing that. But that honestly,
somebody says, I want to be a screenwriter to make a bunch of money. So what should I do? Become a plumber instead. That's
right. Be a crypto bro, man. Like you're much better off.
Yeah.
No, but it's
By
like,
comparison, I guess.
yeah, but seriously, like, I mean, seriously, the stats are like being a baseball player or something.
Yeah, I mean, I follow Ed Solomon on Twitter, writer of smash hit Men in Black, among many other movies that are popular. And he says all the time he still hasn't seen like a residual check for Men in Black because it still hasn't made any money somehow.
Right.
And this is a movie, this is Men in Black, for fuck's sake. Like, how has that not made any money? But yeah, I mean, why else are writers thinking of striking or probably going to strike soon? Again.
Yeah. And that's the thing, man. It's like, it's not fair. Like, I don't want to live in a world where like it's messed up that like that it's even required that we have to have a union, you know, like we have to have a union because we keep getting screwed over by, you know, major studios, and there's just not enough, there's too much ambiguity in like what are you getting percentage wise in residuals like with online streaming. So, you know, I mean, I fully, obviously, like we fully support like, you know, the strike and everything, even though it is hurting us, even though we're not in the WJ, it's hurting us anyway, because I know the last time they did the strike, we just got so many bad shows, like good shows, but like bad episodes, you know what I mean? And it was just like so many, and we know that's coming down the pipeline.
Well, and the rise of shows that don't even necessarily require writers, you know, after the 2007, 2008 strike, there was this heavy investment into reality programming because the editors don't have a union, the producers have a union, and it's amazing and gives them a ton of power.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like I feel like a more mom and pop production company would be much more fair to their writers, right? As opposed to like, you know, a major studio where it's like nobody knows really who's running it, you know what I mean? Because there's so many, like there's so many heads and whatnot, and it's all seems to be geared towards like really making sure that like the percentage of returns are going to be good. Obviously they want to make great content, and we do see great content all the time, but it's just like it just sucks that like there's so much risk in it that it ends up, some of the negative consequences end up you know, becoming like what we see today, where it's like, you know, you could be a really good writer with a great spec script and that'll get you hired, but that's not going to get that spec script made, you know what I mean? And it could be a great script. Like I've been on the blacklist, and like not on the blacklist, but I went to the blacklist site and they have a section where you can like read some of the screenplays that did well, and they have script readings, right? So it's like a podcast series, right? And it's just phenomenal, man, seeing that. And I keep thinking like, how has this not been made? But then it makes sense because the marketing for it isn't obvious,
Right.
Isn't as obvious as like a psychological, like high concept thriller or something like that.
Yeah, if they don't know how to make a trailer for them or whatever, how to market it, they're not going to make it. But yeah, but I mean, that said, I think there is still a lot of great movies being made. You know, it's, you know, I mean, there's fantastic movies that are coming out now. So I don't think that, you know, is necessarily the case. I think it's, you know, I guess it's like, you know, smaller movies aren't getting made as much. That's for sure. So there is definitely a push more towards tentpole and, you know, bigger things. And obviously that's, from a business perspective, I guess it does make sense, you know, it's like why they would do that, you know, but it's like also like, you know, you're just killing like a lot of the smaller movies, which should come out. And I guess occasionally they throw people a bone and they make those smaller movies, but
well, yeah, the power is really with the actors at the moment. So if you have a script that is good and you can get it in the hands of the actor who'd be playing the lead or the second lead, and they have an interest in it, it can happen. You know, that's the, like, I think 75% of you know, what's being made right now is the talent based. I think the directors come second to that. I think the writers come like 9 or 10 to that on that list.
Right. Which is insane. Like I honestly,
I don't know that it's been any different than that forever. So
yeah. But I mean, you know, I heard back in like the 80s and whatnot, it was somewhat common where it's like a writer and director would like come in and they would just pitch the studio like Ghostbusters or something. it would be like, all right, yeah, let's give it a chance. Like, let's put 15 million in this or 30 million and go for it.
Yeah, I don't think it's too dissimilar from now. Like the great stuff that's going to be coming out is Oppenheimer, made by an auteur director, a writer director. Is Dune 2, which is like, well, Arrival was huge. So to Villeneuve, like, well, what do you want to do next? I want to do a Dune adaptation next. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Like people who do have power, like Nolan or Villeneuve, or Spielberg doesn't have the Lincoln was almost direct to HBO, and that was back in 2012. Like we've kind of been on that path for quite a while now, where like it's really tough to get stuff made. The current environment is impossible. The fact that Disney and Warner Brothers are having trouble getting their own projects with IP they already own, produced, should be setting off alarm bells across the entire industry, and I think it is actually. And 30 or so years that I've been just a nerd about movie trivia and what's going on in Hollywood today. I've never seen the industry this chaotic. I've never seen the industry this risk averse ever before. And maybe I hope something really good will come out of it. There'll be another kind of like renaissance of smaller films, of independent film, sort of like another spec script craze of possibly like there was in the mid 90s. Something good should theoretically come out of all the turmoil. But just the fact that like so many big movies are bombing, and there's been executives being laid off at both of these companies left and right. And that's kind of good, because it's certainly not the writer's faults, because they're just doing what they're told. It's certainly not the guy that does the lighting's fault. They're just doing what they're told. I think the power was so focused with people who, like we were kind of hinting at before, just haven't lived enough life to really understand how to like create something that can reach an audience, that can reach mass audiences. They're thinking that just relying on the CG and the incredible star power of Paul Rudd is going to make them $1 billion. That's foolhardy, through and through.
Yeah, it's like you can fool them once, right? Maybe a few times, but
they want this. Well, but if you show that same thing to them 10 times, they're going to want something else. Anybody would. We clearly want something else. And whether or not the people that are making those decisions like are able to understand what that is or what that might be, if they can't, they got to go. They should be out.
Honestly, I think it has to do with the cost of production and marketing, and the kind of returns that you could get, right? Like film is just always inherently going to have risk involved, right? No matter,
it's a bet. Every project is like a bet.
Every project is a bet.
Yeah.
But with technology and everything, we can reduce the cost at least, so that way it becomes less risky to invest in films, which means that they're going to be much more willing to take on risks, right? So that's my hope, is that as things get cheaper, you're going to see producers and production companies that are just going to take bolder stories, right? Stories that may not work out because, hey, guess what? Now we're only putting, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 or something, like a 200,000. Like I like to believe that like 20 years down the road, putting $200,000 into a film is going to be like the equivalent of putting 200 million plus into a film, and you're still getting the, same quality output.
And with inflation, it's likely to be the other direction. Like all of a sudden the movie cost $1 billion.
Right.
Rings of Power cost $1 billion. That was a $1 billion bet that Amazon was making. This would be something that would bring in, the math on it, it would have to bring in $3 billion for them to make a profit off of it on the books. And if it can't do that, then that was a bad bet. So I don't, like I say, like I've never seen them this risk averse at this point, but they have every right to be risk averse. Don't blame anybody for feeling that way, because we've seen these companies make bets that big and it has not worked out. Ant-Man or Quantumania was $400 million, and they really wanted to make $1 billion. That was a bet. That's a risk they were willing to take, and just because we've seen it so many times, it's not working. Or at least the movie has to be, like I was saying, like the movie has to have meaning behind it, not just this other stuff. And they tried, God knows, they tried to do what they can to give it some kind of human angle, to put a heart and soul in the movie. But people are really good bullshit detectors at the end of the day. The audience is really smart. You can't talk down to them, even though I'm the one saying, like, you have to shout it, whatever is subtle. It's the dichotomy of the thing. They're actually really smart at the end of the day. They'll see through your bullshit. They'll see through what you're trying to do. And they'll just be like, hey man, I just want to be entertained. And this ain't it.
Yeah.
This didn't entertain me. That's just that simple.
Yeah.
Well, I think
and that hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I agree. It's very hard.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times, I think that's one of the exciting things about AI and generative media. I think that, we're going to be entering a world where people are going to have their own, basically be able to do it themselves a lot easier. And I think that's going to be exciting.
The same thing happened in music. I'm sorry to talk about it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. With SoundCloud, and Pro Tools, and suddenly you had this emergence of basement musicians who became like Chance the Rapper. Right? He's a Grammy award-winning rapper, not signed, and he won a Grammy. He's like one of the first to do that. And you get all these musicians coming out of platforms like SoundCloud, Spotify, and stuff, and they're totally independent. I think that filmmaking hasn't reached that level yet, but I think it's coming. And I think that once the tools to be able to make it to do it yourself are a lot easier and cheaper, you're going to see a basement filmmakers like screenwriters, solo screenwriters / filmmakers making movies and outside of the studio system.
The end result with AI is you could, program, well, here's the characters, here's what they look like. And, here's how I want the shots to kind of be composed. I want it to be in the style of this director, that director.
Yeah.
And here's the script.
Yeah.
Make it happen. Here's all the pictures you're going to need. Here's all the sets, the settings.
But you also have to factor in marketing too. And that's the thing that I think AI is going to be really helpful for as well. So, if you can reduce the marketing costs as well, then you got like a real huge dynamic shift in the industry. But without that, then there would still be a huge benefit to getting signed by like Sony or whatever.
Well, that's the thing. Exactly. Like one of the things of the studio system is like the real advantage of the studio system is they can get money because banks give them money, right? They'll loan them money, and also they have the distribution, and that's the big thing.
Yeah.
Right. And marketing budget.
Well,
actually put something out.
Yeah.
It's technically free to put. You could make your movie all yourself and control every aspect of it and put it on YouTube or Nebula or something like that. And but will an hour and a half movie on YouTube ever be as big of a hit on YouTube as something like Jurassic Park is in a theater?
Yeah.
I don't think that's possible, at least not under the current kind of paradigm that we have with the sites that we have. But it's certainly possible. Can somebody do it? Is it workable? Is it marketable? What does that idea look like? How broad would it have to be? Because the stuff that hits on YouTube is like Gangnam Style,
right?
Or like I made an omelet, right?
Yeah, it's
like I made an omelet with all ghost peppers,
Right.
Oh my God. Well, but it's interesting. YouTube, I think their new CEO started pivoting in a new direction. Like probably started right before the pandemic, but they were really emphasizing like a lot more intellectual content, like podcasts from, like I listen to a lot of podcasts from people who aren't even related to screenwriting, like geopolitical analyst or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Retired general or whatever. He's got this like podcast now talking about like, UN stuff and whatnot. And then people, it's just really interesting to see, like, I guess
it's not just dumb cat videos anymore.
Yeah,
exactly. It's like more than that,
and it's getting a lot more professional. And so
I watch a lot of food shows and food tour, like Mark Wiens and Best Ever Food Review Show. I watch a lot of that stuff, and the quality of that's only increased. Just because you can get that guy a good camera now,
right.
It's still the same and a better editing setup, but it's still like, 3 people in a room doing the editing. I love Guga Foods, and it's like, here's our editing bay, and it's 3 guys at dual monitor workstations, Whereas like if you watch it, it looks really like, it's just a guy with a camera somehow. Like it kind of gives the audience that feeling, but it has a very industrialized kind of back end of production.
People need to understand it's like, we're in a very interesting stage in the world, or in terms of innovation of AI, because we're still trying to figure out how to use this stuff and how useful is it going to be. I don't think a lot of the companies that are out now are necessarily going to be around in 10 years or 5 years, even if they're like big now. It's like, well, that use case may not exist in 5 years, and maybe something else. Like, we don't really know where it's going to land. So I think that,
do you even need a company in the future?
Well, yeah,
do you
exactly.
need the concept of a company?
Yeah,
could change to the extent that it's no longer like groups of people like raising a bunch of money to like make something grand. It's like you're just typing it out. Like, you are somebody who has a really good idea, and maybe you do have some technical knowledge or whatever, but you're just typing away and interacting with this AI to basically make it, for your specific use, and that's it. And you're like not even selling it anymore. You're just using it for this.
Right. I can't help but think of the movie Argo. They're making the fake movie.
Oh yeah.
And it's like the luncheon or the cocktail hour kind of dinner with the script read through, and they have the poster. And it's very much like, well, that's how you used to make a movie, is you held a function in a hall and got donations from people and just invited everybody that might give you money. And now, you can just be in your basement and kind of do that with other people who are also in their basement, and you all have that same amount of money.
Yeah.
So what's the difference? Why is one, oh, well, you're not doing it the way that we do it, or that we've traditionally done it? Well, that's true for everything on a historical, timeline. That's true for everything.
Yeah. But I mean, no matter what, though, I think like I just love making films. Like, it's just,
I love writing. It doesn't matter if it gets made at this point. I kind of know
telling a story.
Well, so that's a good question. Like, why do you love writing?
I don't know. I just love doing it. You can kind of play God in a story, so I just get off on that mostly.
It's a power thing. I see.
I create interesting characters with something to say, and led interesting lives, and I'm just merciless to them. As far as putting them through the ringer.
Yeah.
I mean, I love the act of writing. I love breaking the story, and a good turn of phrase or a really good line of dialogue, that I've created is just a really good kind of ego boost. But just with everything that's happened the last few years of the industry, I've sort of soured a little bit. I've not been public about this with the group at all, just because I still want to support a new writer coming in that has the dream. My experience is not going to be their experience. Their experience is not going to be Bob's experience, Bob Sen's experience, or anything.
Not to actually
everybody's different in this world. That's the way this works. But at the same time, like, I've personally just become kind of disillusioned. I love like placing in the screenplay contests. I want to do better, at my scripts, to do better in those contests, and maybe just win enough so it's like I'm too good to be ignored or something. And but as it is, like, I don't write the scripts that have done the best in those contests for me will never get made. Those are scripts that like almost cannot be made. And I think that's why they do well in the contests, because what they're looking for is actually much different than what the National Association of Theater Owners, is looking for. That's very different than what the heads of major studios are looking for. They're looking for the $1 billion movie, the crowd pleaser, and all this stuff. And that part's not cynical. That's the way it's always been. My cynicism is like, I kind of wouldn't want them to produce one of my scripts anyway, because they would just make the ending happy. They would, one of my favorite movies is The Money Pit. And it's like, man, people talk about you couldn't make that movie today. You couldn't make The Money Pit today. It's too simple. They would make like a ghost in it for some reason. It would have to be like somebody has superpowers for some reason. It's too simple. It's too honest, and that's just the reality. I don't think there's anything to be like angry at anyone about of that dynamic. It just is the way it is. By the same token, like I have two kinds of scripts that I write. One is for the contests to maybe win. And the other one is, the food truck, script, where it's like, it's just very simple and cheap and contained and all that. Like, oh, maybe if this one sells, I'll give this one, here's the one that you want to make. You don't want to make this one. I don't think it's legally even possible. It's like the Madonna biopic script that won whatever it was a few years back is been in production hell this entire time because you can't make that movie without the participation of the person that it's mostly about. It just won't get off the ground at all. But at the same time, is the script great? It's phenomenal. It's amazing and speaks to so many truths that humans can relate to. It's incredible work. So it's almost like, well, don't make I'm good. Please don't make this one because it will never get off the ground. It'll just be stuck in production hell or whatever. And the screenwriting group itself, any discussion about that, everyone has horror stories. Oh, there's this script that, it just never really got there. It got optioned. And the personal horror stories of people is like, and then I kind of got my hopes up, and I thought I'd made it in the industry or something. And it's like, you didn't make it, but it's not, there's no making it. That's the illusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Even Aaron Sorkin has to hustle to get them to even look at his script. That's the truth.
Yeah, making it would probably be like, hey, I've been able to like generate like, enough to retire and not have to work again. And that's making it,
Well, I guess it depends.
And, I made a name for myself and that's it. It's not like this thing where it's like, oh, suddenly, boom, it's like I'm there. I made it.
What is everyone's version of making is different, Some people just want to sell a script. Some people just like, honestly, it's like, the satisfaction of just creating the story in any form, right? If it's like written or if it's visual or if it's a comic, whatever, it's like just getting it out of your head and onto an organized, concrete way,
Yeah. No, I have my shitty novels that I wrote, and I loved writing every single one of them. I loved every word. And the problem was other people didn't like them. Other people couldn't relate to the characters, or the way I was telling the story was kind of just wrong. There was no tension or whatever being built. There was no excitement. So those were the things that was like, all right, I love writing. How can I at least do that in a way that like somebody can just go, hey, yeah, that was pretty cool. That was my base. That was my baseline of like, all right, and according to that, I've made it already. Right. I did everything I set out to do.
Yeah.
I wrote it's 3 scripts now that consistently, quarterfinal or semifinal in anything I submit them to pretty much. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, no, mission accomplished, man. I'm done. I can get hit by a bus right now.
Yeah.
With a satisfied mind. I have no need to like make it or whatever that is. It helps that I'm the admin of the screenwriting group, and that's a ton of power, that I don't take lightly any single day of the week.
Yeah,
it's a huge platform, and I've purposely gone out of my way not to use it for my own like advantage, I guess, or like query on that, or mention it in a query letter, which I don't write queries anyway because I'm terrible at it, and the whole thing pisses me off.
Yeah. I think it's totally fine to, I know on your Coverfly thing, like you do mention that you're admin for it, but that's pretty admirable,
That's just to let people know, like, oh, it's the same guy. Okay.
Exactly. And it definitely speaks volumes for sure, because I don't think they would have somebody running that if they didn't at least know what they were talking about in terms of writing, like screenwriting. Sure, maybe you haven't sold a screenplay that was made into a film or whatever, but at least you know what you're doing. You know what I mean? And that definitely speaks a lot.
Yeah.
It can take a long time just to learn how to do that. I think it took me like 4 years minimum just to get the basic, like, okay, somebody can go through the first 5 pages and not like want to throw up. Right. You know what I mean? And at least give feedback. Probably up to like 7-8 years before I myself felt at least comfortable on page, but I have yet to, sell a screenplay or anything like that. That's something I'm working on actually right now, trying to, but
good luck.
We'll see how I go. Yeah. It's like,
I wrote one on assignment, and that's my big, like, hey, it was a producer reached out to me and said, I have this idea, it was of course about being an EMT. So it's like, I think you'd be the perfect person to write it because you're a good writer, clearly, and here's the idea. And
that's cool.
it went nowhere, and that's fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't, stuff is or is not, or it's meant to be or it's not. I think a lot of the pressure new writers put on themselves to create something, they're trying to like make love to the world. I think it's Tolstoy's quote about trying to just do too much, with their first script or second script. And yeah, it takes years to kind of like get the hang of it.
Yeah.
My only advantage, the 7 years ago or 8 years ago, I guess, that I, joined the screenwriting group. My only advantage was I kind of went through this already. In high school, became a huge film buff, started writing little short scripts and like SNL style sketches and stuff, and short stories, and then went to a year of film school at Temple University and dropped out, left after 1 year. I had a couple of production assistant jobs in Philly, on the back of like, oh, you're in film school, here, come on. And hated it. They paid no money. The hours were terrible. It's terrible. So I got a real job as an EMT and lived. But the pressure that, these new writers put on themselves is just that, like, I have to do it all. If I'm not, in the industry or adjacent to the industry, I'm not going to make it. And that's not true. They think if they're not like really good right off the bat, or like they had some negative criticism to their ideas or their first or second script, that it's over. I don't have what it takes. And that's not true. Everybody has to work. Everybody has to do this a bunch of times before you get okay at it. That's why the elders in the screenwriting group, they just try to say, don't worry, just keep writing.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
It move on to the next thing, whatever you have to do.
It should be like, honestly, like you kind of have to just come to peace with the reality of like how it is, and then just enjoy the experience of writing something. And honestly, like I'm I want money, and sure, I want to like, be able to work or whatever, and blah blah blah. But at the same time, like I think I would be comfortable having a day job, but I'm writing something that at least like maybe 100 people or 200 people regularly tune into, and just like are like, wow, this is a really cool story. I like this.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all I really kind of want, honestly. That would be success to me. But like, I think it's interesting. Like I know you mentioned Bob Saez. I hope I'm saying his last name correctly. Sens, yeah. He is a top-notch writer for sure. Like his advice is totally on point. But it's really interesting because I think the angle that he takes is like he really nails down the reality of the situation. Like, look, if you want to be a working writer, you have to do this, and these are things that suck. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to have to, I mean, yeah, like obviously you want to collaborate. You don't.
Yeah. If you hate Zoom calls, if you hate phone calls, if you hate emails, if you hate going to film festivals and just talking to absolutely everybody about anything, if you hate all that, it ain't gonna work.
Exactly. And so that was like my disillusionment, not what he was saying. I mean, that certainly reinforced it, but because I learned about all this stuff like back in like 2012, but it was just the whole like stories of hearing like, oh man, this guy spent so many years writing all these stories, and he finally got a manager or whatever, and blah blah blah, and they love the spec script, but then it never went anywhere. And then they wanted him to make Garfield in space or something. And then it was just like, they made a few things, but then they weren't getting paid that much. And now they're a school teacher or something. And it's like, it really was so like disappointing to hear like a lot of those stories. And so for me, I think the realization of like, okay, well, we got to do more than just write. Like we need to like make films. We need to like, engage with the indie film community, because even if we're not like, sowing a path to like Hollywood success, at least we're, out there making stuff, and then possibly, able to position ourselves to like make real indie films that can net a profit and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, even 90% of like movies that are made are just in general, are made outside of Hollywood, so the whole idea of like and you're a very new writer, somebody who's a teenager or early 20s, and all of a sudden it's like, I have these ideas. I want to, so I can be in Hollywood. Bob is really great. A lot of the members that I've seen some shit are really great at kind of like demythologizing what Hollywood actually is. You have to stop and ask yourself, what is Hollywood? It's, it's everywhere. It's everybody.
Right.
If you're making a movie, it could be in New Jersey, and that's making movies. You don't need to be Hollywood. It doesn't need to be Hollywood. You can go to your local, the group has some international members, and every once in a while it is that, like, well, but I live in this country. How can I, be in Hollywood? It's like, well, you got a college, there are theater kids, there's kids with cameras. Go find them, go talk to them, make friends with them, and say, hey, I have this idea. What do you think?
Yeah. Maybe you'll land. Maybe you'll land in Hollywood, maybe, but that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should just be like making stuff that people can enjoy and that you might be able to leverage for some money. You know what I mean?
But if you don't enjoy doing it, it's not going to work. If you don't enjoy, like with writing, if you don't enjoy just the writing itself, sitting down in the chair and typing, that part I hate the most. That's probably not gonna. I see people tweet this a lot, like, oh, that's the worst part. That's the part I hate the most of this whole thing. I love just sitting there and thinking about the ideas. It's like, well, that's everybody, man.
I know, yeah.
Everyone has an idea.
That's everybody.
Yeah.
We all sitting there just daydreaming about being a spy or something. That's what everybody does.
Yeah.
Right. The hard part is getting it on
nailing
page.
it down and getting the logical matrix set up so that it feels authentic.
Right.
And works.
And
it's a lot.
Because that's where, again, like you can't film an idea. You know what I
mean? Again, my only advantage, at this is that I write like 80 words a minute. So, secretary level speed.
Really
so when I'm good and ready with the idea itself, I have a good handle on scene by scene, everything that's going to play out, the plot. It's easy because I just sit down and it starts to come out. But at the same time, like, it is terrible. You're just chained to this keyboard. Who would want to do this?
Man.
You have to want it. You have to enjoy that part of it, or else it's not going to work out.
Right.
Oh yeah, nothing is better than just having an evening where it's like you're isolated from everyone. You got your like favorite background music going or whatever, and you're just lost in this world. And I think it's really fascinating when you're trying to get into the characters to develop them. One character that I'm working on right now is a psychopath, and it was super hard because at first I just thought it was obvious, right? Like you kind of go into it and you're like, okay, so she's a psychopath, so how is she going to act and blah, blah, blah. But then I'm like, wait, what is a psychopath? Like, really, what is it? Like, how do I make it so where they're not the curly mustache, like,
right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's very basic questions that get the best answers, in the development process. Like, well, what is that really? Who is this?
Right.
What is an architect?
Right, exactly. What
do they do? Yeah.
And then you have to get into the mindset of them, and that's where it becomes like really messed up when you're doing horrible people like that, because you have to. I'm reading a nonfiction book on this guy who like interviewed all these psychopaths, ended up in prison and stuff like that, and it's just super fascinating to like kind of see like how they really physically just cannot understand empathy. Like they cannot, but they don't even realize that they can't. So their brain makes up for that, and they come up with, so like if you ask somebody about love, right, they can't give these abstract ideas or whatever. They literally are just like sex related things, very physical things, but like
a woman who makes you dinner, like,
yeah, exactly. And then it's just, but then they don't even realize it. And then when the therapist like confronted them about it, it's like, well, don't you think that believing in this means that you don't empathize or whatever? And they're like, oh no, man, like those women totally deserve to die, or something.
Right. Like that. Or like I generally think empathy is a waste of time. Like, well, okay, but
it's very strange. So yeah, I mean, just getting it, but that's also why I like doing comedies more, because then you're just like, I don't know, you're stepping into just something that's more lighthearted.
Well, it's really interesting. There's a great book called Violence, and it's about why people commit violent acts and what is the origin of that. And it's like it really goes into this the idea of like knowing your characters and knowing their motivations and really understanding what violent people are like and why they're like this. And so you would if someone didn't do that research, they might create a situation where two characters get into a fight and then or whatever, and one of them actually kills the other, right? But if you understand why people commit acts of violence, you understand that the number one cause is shame, right? Is like you have this deep seated shame which you act out. And so in a scenario like that, if you understood that, right, then it opens up a whole deeper level and the dialogue and the action and why that person did that. So just creates a much more interesting, deeper screenplay, right, and story.
Philosophy too.
Absolutely, absolutely. The philosophy of the psychology of it. Again, that's what I said about realism, like making that character actually be a realistic psychopath. It can't hurt the story. Like it can only improve the storytelling.
Yeah.
Same as people bitching about like, oh, you can't do a horror movie in the modern day because people have cell phones, there's surveillance and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, you can. You work around it. You do it here. That way there's none of that. Or you do it over here and you have everybody give up their I don't know. You like create a reason why.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it harder for sure.
Oh yeah. You gotta think, you gotta think that extra step a little bit. Oh well.
Yeah.
Oh well. So it can only improve the writing, going that extra level. I put like a moratorium on myself somewhere along the way. It was like I don't want to write psychos. I don't want to write cops or detectives or something like that. I don't want to write about crime. I don't want to write violence. I've shot I'm an Eagle Scout, so I've shot every single gun there is that they allowed teenagers in the 80s and 90s to shoot. And I'm kind of abhor violence at this point. So it's like I don't want to write violent stuff, and at the time it was very like, well, what else is there? I didn't really know. And but following that path has opened up a world of storytelling possibilities that I've written stuff I never would have even thought of writing before. And it's stuff that hits hard and says a lot. But it's also very simple at the same time because it's not like one man with a vendetta, they killed his dog. Like it's not that, so I had to figure out like, well, what else do people relate to that is violent, that isn't just inherently violent actions. I want to write about characters that aren't just punching and shooting their way out of their problems.
Yeah.
I want them to think. I want them to do other stuff, and I think those are the scripts that have semifinal and quarterfinal. It only improved my writing, going like, I'm not going to write about these things, and I don't care. Like, I still have ideas every once in a while. It's like, all right, there could be this detective that's doing this thing. Like, I'd much rather write about the food truck. I love food.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I see a lot of short films, and their number one enemy, I guarantee you, if you did like a big data collection on this, like you probably find that like one of the top like antagonists are always the serial killers because it's such a cop out. Like, it's just like, oh, that's the way they are. Their brain is wired that way. And that's a huge challenge with this story I'm working on because I don't want this person to be a psychopathic serial killer. I just want them to be a psychopath, in general. But then, okay, how do I make her non-violent or whatever? And then, of course, that plays into like manipulation. Like, okay, because I'm not that kind of guy where I'm thinking 4D chess, like House of Cards, like the Frank Underwood guy. But now it's like suddenly you have to figure that out.
There's some quote that's that like it's impossible to write characters that are smarter than you are, but it's really easy to dumb everything down and go like, well, this character's an idiot. They don't notice the thing.
Yeah.
That is completely obvious to the audience because you want it to be. To foreshadow or whatever. Writing a psychopath is hard, but I think coming out of the 90s especially, there was just so many movies that was like killers on the run,
right?
Somehow,
and they're always like one-dimensional,
it's like somebody shoots somebody and suddenly it's not a big deal, right? Like, oh man, there was one Heat, right? Remember that movie? It was a fantastic
The
movie.
movie I always bitch about.
I
Yeah.
love the ending, except for that one detail, which is how the hell did they get away?
From that shootout.
Like, there's no
Yeah.
way they went GTA 5 style. Like,
Right. They're
I
at
mean,
5-star level, GTA.
There's
Like,
no
how the
way
hell
they're
did they
getting
get out of
into
that? Like,
that drove me nuts.
that does, it does take, see, that's
Because
where
it's a movie, and
It is,
the
yeah.
plot demands it. You know,
I don't know. I love the movie, yeah, but I agree with Matt. It's like,
Even in the 90s,
it does take me out a little bit. So it's like the opposite, right? It's like realism does take me out. It's like when it's unreal, it's like, whoa, wait a second.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Even
that
in
one, a lot of movies make that mistake really early on, and it just destroys the rest of whatever you're trying to do. You might have a great third act, but there's so much in that first act that just defied belief
Right.
that people are no longer on board. We've seen it with a lot of the blockbusters the last like 5 to 10 years. Most of them, where
Yeah.
like there's just such stuff kind of like early on that it's like, well, why is this even happening? Well, because we needed 5 more minutes in the movie, or we needed to set up a Disney Plus show,
Right.
Or whatever it is.
Or
I
this executive really needs to have this in the movie, and like,
Yeah. Well, he just bought this car, or
Right.
something. So the car needs to be in the movie.
Yeah. And that's just frustrating.
From my very limited experience, working at industry adjacent or inside the industry, if regular people found out, what makes this project get the green light versus this one, they'd be very shocked. Most people are purposely kind of like, I don't know, they're not as into movies as we all are to begin with. I think the younger generations now are not going to be theater goers like our generations were, or generations before. I just don't think that's what they're going to do, and that's not right or wrong. It just is the way it is. But by the same token, like, yeah, if I were one of them, I wouldn't either, because like, what are they really getting, out of it?
Yeah, I know. And it's so sad. Like I've talked to younger kids, like 18, 19-year-olds and stuff. And, when I ask them, oh, what's your favorite movie? It blows my mind. It's like, oh, the Green Lantern or something. And I'm like, what? Like, what about Jurassic Park? Oh, Jurassic Park 4 was pretty cool. Like, what? Like, come on, man. Like,
Yeah.
I have the advantage of I was the kid with older parents. I have an older brother, and we were both the kids with like the parents that were much older than everybody else's parents. So we grew up like thinking our house was decorated like the 60s still. We're like, oh, it's the 60s, come over to our house. And then later we found out it was more like the 40s. So like we grew up with a ton of stuff that was just like nowhere on other kids' radar. Movies that were black and white and are from the 50s and the 40s. One of my favorite shows was Bonanza, as a kid, just because it was on, and my dad liked it or whatever it was. So like my sensibilities are all off. But yeah, like the younger people, they're not going to be as into it. They love Coco Melon. Okay. We love Back to the Future. And if you watch those movies, they're actually pretty bad. And they're all the same movie. They made the same movie 3 times.
Right.
But people love him, and I've just learned to shut up about it. Like, you don't want to hear what I think about. You don't want to hear what I think about, this thing or that thing, because I've like reanalyzed it over the years. I'm like, well, what was it about that was so
Yeah.
that was so cool? Because just for the writing angle of like, you can love this movie or hate this movie. People bash this movie or that movie. People don't like that Bob Sands is it's like the Hallmark writer, and they think that that's somehow less than, and that's bullshit. Like, that is just wrong.
Right.
Nothing is less than. Everything's on the same playing field, in terms of like what you're doing physically. If you're writing Quantumania, it's this. But if you're writing Hallmark, it's this. If you're writing a student film, it's this. If you're it depends on what you're doing. What you want to do,
Right.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
yeah.
Like, well, I mean, yeah, with Bob's Hallmark movies, I mean, they're, he's under contract. I don't think any of them respect. Maybe I'm incorrect about that.
I don't think so.
Yeah, but he did it the way they wanted to. You know what I mean? It was just like somebody coming in and
Well, it's a job,
being
right?
a DP
Yeah.
for a commercial or something like that. Like, you're not going to get some Wally Pfister like crazy stuff in that.
Well, but that's you can, but you can.
Yeah.
You know, if that person's able to modulate what they do into this, they're free to do that. There's no rules that way. You know, of like, well, you're this, that means you can't do that. No, you know, the script that got Bob the Hallmark jobs was, or his initial one at the very least, you know, it was a script that like Hallmark would never make that movie. It's extracurricular activities.
That was
Watch it. It's a great movie. And yeah, like, no shit. They would never make that movie.
Right.
But they read the script and they went, you're a really good writer. And your sense of like how to create characters and twists and make the plot play out really interestingly is top notch. You know, do you want to write something like this? You know, I've tried to do the same where it was like, you know, well, I like to write these kinds of stories, you know, but I don't want to write, like the food truck is a good example. It's my go-to at the moment. But there have been other scripts where it was like, okay, well, here's something that's like more stuff that more people enjoy. You know, here's a movie that's like an 80s throwback, you know, kind of dramedy, you know, kind of thing, like the food truck is. It's very much like 80s, you know, sort of rom-com, but without the romance. Just the tone of it. Supernatural rom-com. You know, so it's like, all right, here's an easily marketable idea. You know, I just have to figure out how to write it in a way, or, you know, that I can stomach. You know, here's things that I'm doing that make it interesting to me, but the idea itself is something that is easily marketable. It fits in a little peg in terms of how they might market it, or who it would be for, or who I would be pitching it to, you know, if it came to that. So it's very much like, you know, like, well, yeah, you can write this stuff, but also if you can write this other stuff in a way that's cool, why not? You know, the fear, I think, of AI sort of comes down to, in some cases, as far as screenwriting, it's like, oh, it can do the stuff that like is really difficult. You know, like, well, I like, if somebody's like, well, I write crime dramas. Okay, write a family movie about an alien. You know, they're not going to be able to do that, whereas the AI can.
Yeah.
We assume they might. I'll put it that way. That's a better way to say it. You know, we might assume that the human writer isn't going to be able to do that. And they're perfectly capable of doing that. We're all complex creatures capable of existing on different levels and modulating our own behaviors to fit this audience or that audience. You know, it's 2 a.m. at a comedy club. You can curse up a storm and it's okay. Yeah. But if you're delivering the keynote speech at a luncheon, you know, for executives at a Fortune 500 company, yeah, you're not going to talk the same way. You're not going to act the same way. The point of your story or whatever is going to be totally different. You know, we do that naturally. You know, why should screenwriting? Why should screenwriting be any different?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, stories are stories, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're writing about rom-coms or dramas or crime or alien movies. It's like, it fundamentally, it's a story. It's just, you know, where it takes place is the skin of it, right? So it's like, you know, fundamentally, it's you know, it's a story at the end of the day. So
yeah, I mean, as the admin of the group, you know, my interest is just mitigating conflict. So like, I consider that rude whenever somebody is kind of like bashing, you know, a writer like Bob in the group for like, oh, but you just do this. Yeah, like, man, you know, you would kill for a Lifetime movie or something. Shut the fuck up. Like, you know, that's where it's just rude. Like, don't judge people like that, especially if you know, you're not a working screenwriter. You have no place to talk about like what a working screenwriter is doing or not doing to try to make money. That's their job. You know, a lot of screenwriters make the most money off of like the book about screenwriting, or, you know, a blog or a podcast or whatever it is. Like there's so much side work that is kind of required now to have like a full, you know, media ready personality for them to be able to market you as the writer. You know, that I think a lot of people are more like me, where it's like, but I just want to write stories and I don't really care about all that. And like, I don't poo-poo that either, because that's what I do. You know, so it's like, yeah, do whatever you want. Like, there are no rules that way. Like, write whatever you want. You know, I'm a bit of a nihilist, so it gets me to kind of like be able to say to people, nothing matters. And contextually, it's not a bad thing to say.
Yeah.
It's like, just write whatever you want and enjoy that. Nothing else matters. You know, the money, don't worry about money. Do something else for money, you know, because nobody in screenwriting is making any money.
Right. Yeah.
especially not right now. You know, the environment is just so off kilter. You know, like I said, it's shocking that Disney and Warner Brothers can't get projects produced. If you're sitting there as a fledgling screenwriter wondering why you're not making it, you've been doing this for 2 or 3 years. You have a contest win. If you're wondering, don't wonder. You know, it's a really hard industry right now. It's going through something. You know, as most are. Like if you look around, a lot of industries are actually in a state of flux at the moment. So it's not just Hollywood.
Sure,
it's a lot bigger than that.
Yeah,
I know. I just honestly, like, going back to the Facebook group, like, it really does.
I love it. You know, that's why I've hung around for so long. I really
do. I mean, I love it because, like, and I think it's probably my favorite group at this point. I'm part of a lot of groups.
Great to hear.
I got off of Reddit, honestly, probably a few months back, and just stuck with this because it's like, yeah, you do get some toxicity, but I think it's balanced out really well with, like, just, you know, not only people we want to support, but also, like, it, you know, you'll have a dissident on there and then people will just, like, disagree, you know, and you know, argue their case and stuff like that. I think that's fine. Honestly, just as a general rule, like, I make sure I never say anything that's like a personal attack or whatever. Like, if I disagree with something, like, sure, I'll state it and whatnot. Maybe I'll do it passionately, but I'm not going to be like, you're a fucking idiot and blah, blah, blah. You know, why did you do this? And, you know.
Yeah, I take issue with name calling. That's probably my biggest thing. You know.
Yeah, it's just like, it's just unnecessary. But I think it's the anonymity.
You curse up a storm quicker than, like, but if you call that person an idiot or something, I'm going to remove the comment. It's just that easy.
See, I was going to ask that too. Like, you know, where do you draw the line on that? And I guess, that's a good point. I think it's just, you know, once you veer away from the conversation and just start a personal attack,
right? That's when it's like, okay.
And it's okay to say, like, maybe a witty joke or whatever, or something like that, you know, like something that's like, hey, I disagree and I'm kind of making fun of this or whatever.
I have the group rules are very extensive, and I've really tried to, like, fit into each of them where I could. Like, some sarcasm is allowed. It's okay. You know, we're all real people here. We're all adults.
Exactly.
You can be sarcastic. That's fine. Just don't be mean. You know, is my thing. The mods are amazing at catching stuff where they're just seeing it start to kind of, like, churn into that. And it's catch it immediately and remove the comment and or remove the post.
And I want to give a shout out to Ken specifically. I think what I really appreciate about him is, especially when the AI debate debacle, I guess, was going on, and it was just like, clearly he was getting very annoyed with it, rightfully so, because he was having to deal with it, like, every day. And, you know, I mean, it was getting, like, really heated, but I think what I really appreciated about him was the fact that he really, like, that decision weighed heavy on him, like, what to do and whatnot. And you just don't see that in a lot of places. I mean, it's really just like, nope, I'm right, you're wrong.
Right.
It's just like, done, it's over. But, like, he weighed in on that. He asked for input, you know what I mean? And, you know, I think he approached it, like, exactly how somebody should approach it. You know,
absolutely.
It's great that he disagreed with it, you know what I mean? And he was approaching it that way because it's so easy for him to just be like, no, AI is stupid, blah blah, like, I'm deleting this.
Exactly. You know, my only input on it was I just don't like to see the comment section descend into you know, accusations or, like, name calling or just, you know, rudeness and meanness and stuff like that. You know, that's my big that was my big take on the whole thing. Like, the conversation itself, you know, there are a lot of conversations people try to have in the group, you know, when it comes to, let's say, diversity and inclusion and stuff like that, that, like, brings out sort of, you know, people from the woodwork in the group that have very strong opinions on this thing, and they are not positive. So, you know, I've always erred on the side of, like, I'd just rather remove those posts, and I just say the group is too big. That's too nuanced of a conversation to have in a town hall this big. You know, it will just descend into whatever it is. So Ken has been amazing at kind of going, like, well, hang on, I'll just ban it. He was much more egalitarian and much more, philosophical about it, reflective about it than I was probably willing to be in the moment. So I was just like, I just don't like it. It's too contentious. So we're just going to ban it. And he was like, well, let's have a conversation about that. Because this is something that will affect all of us, but, as far as like the other topics of conversation, it's just too inflammatory for people. Topics of race, politics, religion.
Sure.
Somebody posts a log line and their idea is inherently religious or involves religious figures. It's a real tough call to kind of sit there and like let it happen versus really trying to manage that conversation as it develops, because it could very easily, just descend into madness. And people calling out like the nature of the idea, or like, well, those gods don't exist, so fuck you. And it's like, well, man, this is a log line. Like, can we just kind of treat it on surface as far as the story goes? That's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of like, just kind of admins and mods just popping in and trying to, Ken's a lot more proactive, and it's awesome. And I welcome it. It's, amazing for kind of being in the thick of it with the group. Whereas over the last just couple of years, I've taken a much more, like I'll come in and just weigh in with my, like, it's too vague, or I'll just try to do it as few words as possible, just to not lay down the law, but just like, oh, here's what I think. I don't know, and not get into it, because as admin, like I really can't, There's a lot of like, well, I have opinions on this, like with AI, like, yeah, I do have a lot of opinions on it, but, I don't feel that mine are going to be constructive, to a conversation usually, other than just going like, I don't know, man, it's just another toy that, we're using. It's just another thing in the arsenal of humanity that we have to destroy or create. And it's just another thing. And we do this all the time with stuff. The typewriter was invented and people are like, no one's going to know how to write anymore with their hand.
Yeah.
And that's not true. And it sort of is at the same time. It's much more nuanced than like, it's going to happen and it'll be overnight and everybody's just going to be in bread lines. Reality is very different than that. So like at the same time with the AI discussions, I was very much like, I just don't want to see the agony of people, going through this or trying to have a conversation where it's a place where there are trolls and people will come out of the woodwork and, just be mean about it because they have nothing better to do. So my job or our jobs, is really to go to create a safer place than reality would be in the group to discuss this stuff, if it's a topic that even can be discussed in a place this big. It's like trying to have a discussion, about it in a stadium. It's a stadium full of 80,000 people.
Right.
You're going to see a band and they're going to try to, do this. That's not going to work. It's only going to be the pit that hears them or whatever it is. Like it'll only be the regulars that see it, to begin with.
Right.
So it's just a very like, it's like, okay, we do our best work in the background, and some of that is just removing a post before it becomes a shit show, before anyone sees it, if we can do that. That happened a lot back in the day. That's why I created the words and phrases that the admin assist AI can just screen out at this point. There's a lot of like, this is too hot button, get it out of here. I don't even want to see it. Enough that someone is reporting comments, on a post about Trump or Biden or Corona or whatever it is. That
doesn't make sense to put it in screenwriting, right? Like, at least with the AI thing, there was like AI for screenwriting or something like that, something related to the film industry. But so like you get a lot where it was like just politically charged stuff that had like nothing to do with screenwriting.
Well, but they try. That's what made it so.
They try to meander it, like
it's my log line about a stolen election in the middle of a hoax pandemic, stuff like that. And it's like, I give you effort for, I'll give you an A for effort for trying, but
nice try.
No, because that's clearly this. It's clearly this thing,
Trying to stir.
And they think they're being sneaky, and then they message me and tell me that I'm a tyrant or I'm anti-freedom of speech. And it's like, this is Facebook. This is a Facebook group. I am not infringing your freedom of speech at all. That's not what First Amendment is.
Right.
It's very much, a broad approach. And yeah, Ken's willing to kind of jump into it with people. I've just been doing it so long, I guess. I'm kind of like, I've done all that. I did it a lot early on, and it's a lot of fun. But also, like, at the end of the day, you're just kind of going around in circles with people, So as a mod or as an admin, it's unfortunate, but we learn kind of like, don't get into it. Just don't get into it with people, because one time out of 10, you'll really regret it, because you engage with this person privately and it just didn't, and it went off into them calling you a Nazi for some reason, That's the stuff that nobody sees, that I don't often talk about, because it's depressing. It's like, yeah, no, I get accused of being anti-free speech like once a week. It's fine.
Right. It's tough. It's tough trying to make those decisions, It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny at this point. That's more than anything else. I think it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's I don't think I could have that job, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's just like I couldn't be a cop, because it's like, it's like, well, he's only smoking weed, so I don't know.
Just
but
let him
maybe,
go.
but then
It's like,
he also seems impaired, but
Yeah.
and like yeah. Like I'd rather leave that to other people to try to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit, it's like a Captain America kind of thing. Like, I used to be like, oh, I have to save the group. And it's like, well, I've done my time. I did like 7 tours in this war. It's fine.
Right.
That's where, like, getting good mods that can, it's like, you guys really have the hunger for it and you want to help these people a lot more than I have the time for anymore at this point.
Appreciate your time, dude. This has been
Absolutely
awesome, man.
This went long and it was awesome. I appreciate
This has been great, man. This is like, I don't know. Like,
I think
we don't normally go this long in the podcast, so it's actually great, because I don't know.
I can talk.
I felt natural.
I don't do it. I don't do it often, but I can talk.
And I had all these questions prepared and everything, and we just went off the grid with it. It's great. No, it was way better.
Right.
I think we explored a lot of different things that I was honestly not even expecting. So I mean, I think people are really gonna like this. But yeah, I mean, just real quick though, like, where else can people find you if they want to learn more about you and like the stuff that you work on?
I'm on Twitter at Ross Allaire. I'm on Coverfly at Ross is Weird. I think I'm on Instagram, but I don't really do anything with it. But I'm around. There are only 2 Ross Allaires in the world, so I mean, just Google my name, and the first thing.
Facebook group,
Right. Join the Facebook group.
Yeah,
I'm there all the time.
Yeah, we'll definitely put all that stuff in the show notes as well, so they can check that out. But yeah, man, thank you so much for coming out. Like, really appreciate this, dude.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here.